She lost everything the day she chose her son over her job. One decision, one desperate moment, and her life unraveled in front of her like a thread pulled from a sweater. Her name was Elena. Once, she was a bright and promising executive assistant at a rising tech startup, a woman who balanced spreadsheets with grace and whispered solutions during chaos. But that world had no space for her when life demanded she show up as a mother first. Her son, Micah, was only 3 when the daycare called her during a client presentation. He had a fever. No one else could pick him up. She had no choice. She left mid-meeting, heart racing, and never returned to that boardroom again. The following morning, her boss called her into his glass office and said words that broke something inside her. "We need people we can count on." She wanted to scream that she was someone people could count on, that she'd pulled all-nighters for that company, had skipped holidays, had worked through colds and heartbreaks. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They didn't see her as a woman holding the weight of both career and motherhood. They saw her as a liability, and so she packed her desk. No farewell party, no kind emails, just a box of belongings and a child waiting outside in the rain. Too young to understand why his mother's eyes were red. The years that followed were brutal. Jobs came and went, none stable, none permanent. She cleaned offices at night, stocked shelves at a corner store, tutored neighborhood kids in math. Rent was late more often than it wasn't. Groceries became lists of only what they needed to survive. She sold her car, then her jewelry, then her pride. But through it all, Elena never let Micah see the depth of her struggle. She made birthdays out of homemade pancakes. She turned the smallest park into a kingdom. She sewed school uniforms out of donated clothes and found joy in every little victory. He never saw her cry, not once. When the lights were off and he was asleep, that's when the tears came. Silent, tired, but never bitter. She had made her choice, and she never regretted it. Micah grew up quietly observant. He wasn't loud or reckless. He noticed things. The way his mother's hands trembled when she counted coins at the grocery store. The way she always smiled at him, even when her eyes looked hollow. He saw how hard she worked, how little she asked for herself, and how every decision she made seemed to circle back to one point: him. When he turned 15, he found his first job at a local cafe, lying about his age to get hired. He'd brought home his first paycheck in crumpled bills and handed it to her. She refused, of course. But the look on his face, determined, proud, made her accept it with tears. That, this time, she didn't bother hiding. Micah excelled in school. Not because he was the smartest, but because he was relentless. He stayed up studying while his mother slept on the couch after a late shift. He borrowed second-hand textbooks and learned coding from free online courses on a donated laptop. He got scholarships, small ones at first, then bigger. And when he was accepted into a top university for computer science, Elena cried harder than she had in years. College was hard. He worked nights, slept little, but never lost focus. Every test he passed, every project he completed, it was all for her. He carried a photo of her in his notebook, worn at the edges, always reminding him who had carried him when the world turned its back. 4 years later, Micah graduated with honors. And within 2 more, he had co-founded a startup with a former classmate, one focused on educational access for underprivileged students. It grew fast. Investors believed in his story, in his mission. Money started flowing, then recognition. But none of it touched him the way one moment did when he handed his mother a set of keys. "What's this?" she asked, staring at the small velvet box, confused. Micah smiled, eyes wet. "A house for you, no more renting, no more running." She broke then, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of everything she had carried finally being lifted. But that was only the king code, that's only the beginning. The house wasn't just a roof and 4 walls, it was a promise fulfilled. Alina stood at the doorway of her new home, stunned into silence. It was modest but beautiful. White shutters, a little front garden, sun-warmed wood floors, and a kitchen filled with natural light. There was a small porch, just like the one she'd always talked about when Micah was a boy, and she used to describe her someday dreams. That porch, now real beneath her feet, was more than a dream. It was proof that nothing she gave up had been in vain. Micah didn't stop there. Over the next year, as his startup expanded across regions, he made it his mission to honor the invisible sacrifices of parents like Alina, mothers and fathers who went unseen while lifting the world for their children. He launched a foundation in his mother's name, the Alina Fund, dedicated to supporting single parents returning to education or work. At the launch event, he spoke in front of a crowd of donors, colleagues and strangers, but his voice wavered only once when he turned toward her, sitting front row in the red dress she hadn't worn in years, and said, "My mother lost everything to give me a future. It's my turn to give it back." Tears filled the room, not just hers. Still, Alina never wanted the spotlight. She quietly volunteered with the foundation, mentoring young mothers, showing them how to budget, how to cook creatively, how to believe in their worth again. She didn't give lectures, she told stories. Stories about nights with no heat and mornings with only bread and water, and how love made it all endurable. She told them how her son never needed much, only her presence, her faith in him, and her warmth. These women listened, not because she had money now, but because they knew she had once stood exactly where they stood. Micah, meanwhile, never let success take him far from his roots. Even with business trips and interviews piling up, he still came home every Sunday. They had dinner together just like always. Sometimes they cooked, sometimes they ordered in, sometimes they said very little. But the silence was no longer heavy. It was peace. One night, after another long week of meetings, Micah sat across from his mother at the kitchen table and asked her a question that caught her off guard. "Do you ever wish you'd made a different choice? That you had chosen your job that day instead of picking me up?" She looked at him, brow furrowed, as if the question didn't make sense. "No," she said simply. "Not for a second. I lost a job, but I gained everything." And he knew she meant it. That night he wrote a letter, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. In it, he told his mother everything he never had the words for growing up. How he noticed her sacrifices even when she tried to hide them. How her love had shaped the man he had become. And how he believed the truest measure of success wasn't wealth or recognition, but how you honor the people who carried you when you had nothing. He left the letter on her pillow, knowing she'd find it in the quiet moments of morning, with sunlight spilling through the curtains. He wasn't there to see her cry when she read it, but he knew she did. Months passed, and Alina found herself waking up with something she hadn't felt in years: ease. Her mornings were no longer frantic. There were no buses to catch before sunrise, no late-night shifts to recover from. Her life had slowed, softened, and in that stillness, she rediscovered pieces of herself she had buried under years of sacrifice. She began painting again, simple watercolors at first, then larger canvases filled with the warmth of memory. Micah as a toddler chasing leaves. The corner store they used to walk to every Saturday. The sunlit window from their old apartment. She didn't paint for galleries. She painted for herself. Micah, now in his late 20s, was becoming a voice in his industry, not just a tech entrepreneur, but a public advocate for systemic change. In interview after interview, when asked what fueled his drive, he always said the same thing: "My mother. She built me with empty hands." People were moved, but they didn't know the half of it. They hadn't seen her sleep in cars when rent was late, hadn't tasted the watered-down soup she made last 3 days, hadn't watched her put off doctor visits because the copay meant no groceries that week. He had, and that memory lit a fire in him that no amount of success could extinguish. He invited Alina to his new office one day, a glass building with high ceilings, buzzing with bright young minds and soft, collaborative energy. As he walked her through the floors, every employee he introduced her to smiled like they already knew her. "She's the reason we're all here," Micah said proudly. And they believed it. At the far end of the hallway was a wall covered in photos. Each one showed a parent with their child, paired with a short story beneath, stories of resilience, courage, grit. In the center of the wall was a framed photo of Elena holding Micah when he was 5. He was wrapped in her coat, clinging to her neck, both of them soaked from rain but smiling wide. The caption read, "She gave her everything so I could become something." Elena's breath caught in her throat. That night, over dinner, she told him something she had never dared to say aloud before. "There were nights I wondered if I was ruining your life, if maybe you'd resent me for all you had to go without." Micah reached for her hand, voice quiet. "I never went without, Mom. I had you. That was always enough." Those words stayed with her. Not because they were poetic, but because they were true. And sometimes, truth is the most healing thing of all. As the years passed, Elena aged gracefully. Her silver hair framed her face like a crown, and her laughter returned more often. She became somewhat of a legend in Micah's circle, a symbol of endurance and love, the kind that doesn't make headlines but changes lives. She was invited to speak at schools and shelters, not as a motivational speaker, but as a mother who had lived through the worst and never stopped believing in the best. Her story wasn't dramatic, it was deeply human. One rainy afternoon, she visited her old neighborhood just to see it. The corner store was still there. The laundromat too. But the apartment where she and Micah once lived had been turned into a cafe. She stood outside for a moment, watching people sip coffee where she had once cried herself to sleep. And she smiled, not with regret, but with gratitude. That place had shaped her. Those walls had witnessed her becoming someone unbreakable. She stepped inside, ordered a tea, and sat in the corner. No one knew who she was. She looked around the room, and for a second, she could almost see the ghost of her younger self, folding laundry in the corner while Micah colored on the floor. She whispered a quiet thank you to that version of her, the woman who had survived so that she could now live. Years passed as quietly and gracefully as Elena herself. Micah's company expanded across continents, and so did his impact. Yet no matter where his work took him, New York, Tokyo, Nairobi, his home was always wherever she was. The world knew him as a visionary, a philanthropist, a man driven by purpose. But to Elena, he was still the boy who used to tug her sleeve in the grocery store, who once fell asleep on her chest during the winter blackout, and who, without knowing, it had saved her just as much as she had saved him. One evening, when autumn leaves danced across the sidewalks and the sky burned gold, Micah brought Elena to a quiet ceremony in a school auditorium. She didn't know what to expect. He told her only that it was something small. But when they entered, she was met with a standing ovation. The room was filled with young mothers, single fathers, teachers, community leaders, people who had been helped by the Elena Fund. Many of them carried children on their hips or held hands with kids just beginning to speak. And all of them, in one way or another, had been touched by the story of a woman who had once been told she had nothing left to give. Micah took the stage, holding her hand as he walked her forward. "This," he told the crowd, voice clear and strong, "is the reason I exist in the way I do. This is the woman who showed me that love is the fiercest kind of power." Then, to her complete surprise, the school's new community center was unveiled. Above its glass entrance was a plaque that read, "The Elena Morales Center for Family Resilience." She covered her mouth with her hands. For a long time, she couldn't speak. Her legs trembled beneath her, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming rush of a lifetime's worth of buried pain rising up to be released, not as suffering, but as something holy. Later that night, as they sat together beneath a blanket of stars on the center's rooftop, she asked Micah a question she had never dared ask. Do you think I was ever enough? Micah looked at her as if the world had just asked him the most obvious thing. You were more than enough, he said softly. You were my everything. In that moment, Elena didn't feel like a woman who had lost anything. She felt like someone who had given the world her heart and finally, after so many years, had seen that love come back to her in full. That night, as she walked back through her home, her real home, the one built on sacrifice and reclaimed dreams, she stopped. In the hallway where her paintings hung, one canvas caught her eye. It was of two figures, a mother and son, walking forward through a rainstorm, hand in hand, with a warm light breaking in the distance. She smiled, ran her fingers over the edge, and whispered, "We made it." Because they had.